to report back, first of all, on achieving scale and transitioning to a green economy. Could I ask up to the stage three people? Suhas Apte, Vice President Global Sustainability, Kimberly Clark; Brian Dames, CEO of Eskom; and Sam De Piazza, Vice Chairman, International Clients Group of Citigroup. Thank you, gentlemen. And whilst they're coming to the stage and just getting settled, let me just hear a couple of you saw me walking around. Let me give a couple of quotes that I heard as I was walking around. The first one, which I loved, was, "I'm sorry for being so negative." The second one I heard was "baring teeth," which is fantastic. I heard collaboration. I heard all elements of sustainability and finance must be reported together. So, gentlemen, you're settled and ready. The rules are like this. I've asked each panellist to take just 2 to 3 minutes to briefly report on just one of the questions that they were discussing on the table. And if we have time, we'll then have a quick debate about that, or maybe something else we heard. We have just 10 minutes for each panellist session to keep on track and get you away on time. So, gentlemen, the better you can keep to your 2 to 3 minutes, the better we can have a bit of a debate. So, Suhas, could I ask you to start with the first question? Transitioning to a green economy is a global approach based on shared responsibilities. How can the private sector work with other stakeholders to operationalise more sustainable business practices? And could I please ask, so we can actually hear the panellists? Thank you.
Well, I think our group had a decent debate on this topic, and we concluded that we need to engage and encourage many stakeholders, and I'll tell you some of the examples what the stakeholders we talked about. We first talked about consumers. We collectively need to educate consumers, and I think transparency is very important with consumers to build credibility. Then we talked about government, and we said we require a long-term consistent policy from government, but that may be a big ask, and what we need to do is we need to play our own role, because we create our own problem. Many times, we give conflicting signals to the government and ask for different things. What we need to do collectively is come up with some sort of a consensus so that we are asking for one common thing from a government, then we can get some action. Related to NGOs, obviously NGOs are very important. From our personal experiences also, that we need to engage NGOs and encourage them to participate with us. Sometimes we need to ask NGOs to work together like a team, like what we are doing here, so that there is a common point of view and they don't have a conflicting signals coming back to the industry. We need to engage international organization. On our table, we had a representative from United Nations. He gave us a wonderful example of how 5 stock exchanges today are committing to provide and promote sustainable companies. Now, UN is going to take that concept and go to World Federation of Stock Exchange and World Federation of Security Regulators, so we can engage all of them together to create something what is sustainable business.
Thank you, Suhas. Fantastic. 2.5 minutes on the money. Brian, second question we asked you to answer feedback on is, in what ways can sustainability be mainstreamed into policy in order to ensure continued economic growth which supports social and environmental development?
We had quite an interesting discussion, an excellent table of representatives, all from government, regulation, and the private sector. One of the key issues we've been talking about started off with, we started our discussion with a radical idea around a global national bank for natural resources and how this will be regulated globally. That eventually moved towards our government representatives saying, it will not work because we won't be able to agree. We then moved to a phase where we said that the sectorial bottom-up approach, like the cement industry has taken forward, that can serve very well as a global approach, so that you would have sectorial approaches from different sectors applied globally to address that. We then continue to say at a regional level that there will be significant benefit in that as well, so that Europe, as an example, will have a clear understanding of a regional, consistent, standard approach for all of Europe, similarly for Southern Africa or other parts of the world. So that was eventually where we ended up with the discussion. We had a significant discussion around the issues around standards, how we should limit the efficient use of resources, because unless we do that, we're going to have a problem in terms of running out of natural resources. So that within that regional approach or sectorial approach, that we have certain standards to be put on. The last thing I'd like to mention is a commitment on two aspects. One, we can commit as companies across all of us to commit to our supply chains, including clear approaches towards sustainability. That we can do. We don't need to wait for governments. And secondly, that governments take the lead in terms of government's own procurement to drive sustainability matters, that those two can be quite tangible approaches we can follow. So that was our discussion.
Thank you very much indeed. And finally, Sam de Piazza, I ask you to respond on the third question. What kind of global cooperative initiatives can be undertaken to collectively move toward a green economy?
Well, we as well had a great table discussion on all three questions. On this one, to play off what my two colleagues have also mentioned, first, global initiatives, we should think in terms of social networks. We should think of, one of our colleagues said, how do you create a global virus on this subject? How do you create a consensus that's a tipping point using the consumer issue that you described to create a much broader initiative? We think of this often as businesses, as CEOs, but we all know if we can create a social network movement here, it will have a much bigger effect. There was not a lot of optimism at our table around national governments, but there was a tremendous level of optimism at our table around city governments. And so today in one of the sessions, a reference was made to the C40, the fact that things are happening at city levels that are really dynamic. How can business, in a proactive way, engage with multiple city-level officials to create change? You could have C40s at the big city level, C40s at the mid-level, at the small level. You could have hundreds of cities around the world. We also talked about turning sectoral initiatives, which Brian just mentioned, to cross-sectoral initiatives. Because actually we think it's the cross-sectoral engagement that creates a scale, taking it from cement across all manufacturing. And finally, we said if business can truly empower women as part of this exercise, business and women together, that's a majority. We ought to be able to get that done.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, gentlemen. We're keeping well on track. Time for some questions. I'm hoping that on your table you had a good mix of government, business and civil society. Was there a sense that there was a willingness to participate and collaborate? Or was there any sense of conflict that, no, we just can't make this stuff happen?
On our table, majority of the people were from industries, but we had an interesting discussion related to, in this group here, we represent only 1% of the business community. There are 99% of the business community which is outside. So the thinking was, how can we get a broader engagement coming out of this group by looking at the entire value chain? So if we include people now who are in our value chain all the way from suppliers to the customers, and then look at both social capital, natural capital, and economic capital, we may be able to scale up the things a lot faster than just trying to do it with 1% of the population represented here.
Maybe we could get the virus that Sam was talking about, not just for the consumer, but for business as well. Brian,
I think from our perspective, we had an interesting group of people. I think from the government representation, a strong push for companies to take the lead, and a strong push for this bottom-up approach, whether it is local government and organizations to take a lead. And I think one of the representatives actually said to us, please don't wait for us. Make sure that you move ahead. So I think there has been an agreement as far as that is concerned amongst our table.
Malcolm, there were suggestions in our table that that governments are facing, at least national government levels, are facing such difficult challenges, resources, politics. If business can help government break these issues into discrete projects, helping government move the ball, government's not going to be involved in our vision as well as we'd like. But go at the discrete project level. and that business can also help governments cross departments, working with the Ministry of Finance, Transportation, Agriculture. We touch those departments. In many cases, their silos are their problems. We can help solve some of those.
So, strong sense of collaboration between the different groups, companies taking the lead, maybe even baring our teeth a bit. In the very short time we've got left, we were challenged this morning to do more, to think different, to real scale. Did you hear any crazy, radical ideas? Maybe didn't have a consensus around it, but something off the floor, slightly left field that you'd like to share?
I wouldn't call it radical, but I would call it very intelligent concept what our team came up with. This is in conjunction with the stuff what we talked about, that asking stock exchanges to promote sustainable companies. So thinking what we had was, why not when your company is recognized that you are a sustainable company, why not ask funds and encourage funds to hold the stock for 5 years? So even if your 1 quarter is bad, as long as you have made improvements on your ESG score, you can continue to have stability.
So longer holding by stockholders.
I think from our perspective, we had a discussion around how do you deal with global natural resource utilization and things such as recycling. And one example we had was automotive industry, that there's no incentive to recycle because it ends up being too expensive, and so you keep on depleting natural resources. One way, smart regulation, to put a limit in terms of recycling levels for certain automotive industry, as an example. So the question is then, if companies get together and start doing that, regulators will turn back and say this is a cartel. And one example that was mentioned by the Swiss government is that governments can make exceptions so that companies deal with those good things, take it to governments, and actually earn and go and debate the need for exceptions to be made to protect natural resources. That was one example.
Again, companies taking the lead. Yep.
We discussed the fact that you had to think big. Whatever you do, it has to go beyond the concept of affecting your own department, your own place. I would say we've got the example here today in the room of some world-class CEOs, DSM, Unilever, Nestle, Escom, great CEOs who have leveraged this concept deep into their organizations. And when you leverage deep into your organizations, naturally you create scale. And I don't think we think of it in those terms. Turning 100,000 of your own people loose to create change is powerful. We need to do that as well.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed, gentlemen. If you could give them the usual applause. Thank you.